Yikes.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's 1 o'clock, and I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us here on the Roper Roundtable, the summer edition. I'm very excited today. It's my distinct honor to introduce the Director of Data Operations and Communications, Kathleen Weldon, today, who's going to present on the Roper State Poll Collection. You probably are familiar with Kathleen in that She's been with the Roper Center since 2014, way back when the archive was located at the University of Connecticut. But she's got a full plate here at Roper. She's not just our principal archivist. She also manages our data provider relations. She oversees the data curation process. She plans archival development, works closely with the IT development team to develop new tools and help make iPoll the best it can be. She's also a user and one of our biggest advocates because she uses the center's data to write overviews of the history of public opinion and on a wide range of topics and a wide range of publications. She's a graduate of Wesleyan University with a BA in English and started her career in public opinion at Harvard, sending surveys with media and foundation partners. And for those of you who don't already, follow her on Twitter at Kathleen Weldon, at Kathleen Weldon. Her feed is full of fascinating and interesting polling information. And at times it can be coffee sprayingly funny. So I totally recommend a keyboard drop cloth, but follow her on Twitter. You won't regret it. We're here today because Kathleen has been a big driver behind one of the Roper Center's most recent projects, which is improving access to state level polls. So with that said, I'd like to pass this over to her. Kathleen, may I give you control?
I am going to share my screen here. Stealing the screen back from Henry. Hello, everyone. Welcome. If you've come to one of these in the past, you'll know I don't usually do a PowerPoint, but I actually wanted to do that today. So forgive me as I open up the slideshow. And can everyone see the screen? Is this working correctly?
It's working fine. Thanks.
Excellent. So I assume all of you know what Roper is, but just in case somebody is brand new, the Roper Center is the world's oldest and largest archive of public opinion polling data. We date back to 1947. And we've been collecting state data almost from the very beginning. And the collection, the collection includes over 4,000 state level data sets and a paper collection of reports, top lines, press releases that mostly from the 70s to the early 2000s. We have digital versions after the early 2000s. But today I want to walk you through a bit of the history of state polling and how that world of polling developed in the US. And I want to give you some understanding of why we've recently decided to put some more effort into state level curation and specifically putting questions into the IPOL question database from state polls. And then I will go over to IPOL and show you how to find those polls, how that works. It's pretty straightforward, but I'm going to note that there is a link here that does go to the list of the boxes of paper in case anyone's doing research and looking for earlier state polls and doesn't see anything on the site. There's a list here. Perhaps we have a paper report or a release. You can always get in touch and ask.
Kathleen.
Okay.
Hey,
yes.
Kathleen, real briefly, you're not in presenter view, so we're seeing like the next slide.
Oh,
make that full screen.
Wow. Okay. What's very strange about that is that it's not on here. I'll tell you, technology is not my strong suit. Screen. No, that's
When I went to presenter view, it actually went to a different screen. Maybe you need to share different screen rather than, screen one. You may want to share.
that is quite possible. Can you share of screen two? Better?
There you go. Perfect.
Okay, that's what I get for working off a laptop attached to a separate screen. One too many elements. I can't have two, just one is as many as I can really cope with. Okay, so The first state polls. The very first was in Texas in 1940. Joe Belden, who is a collection of student polling we've recently added to the website, and I encourage you to go look at. When he finished that project and was ready to move on, he started the Texas poll, and that kept going for many, many years. Iowa came in second, and Iowa is still in existence today, so that makes it the oldest running state poll in the country. Minnesota in 44, and California in I don't know why there, in 46. So we've got two of our pioneers of polling there. And the first all-state polling project was Archibald Crossley in 1944. So we have polls from all states in that year. However, over time, things grew. A number of polling projects began, and you'll see some here, some of the early and the more recent polling projects. Some of them have a great long history. And as I say, some continue today. Multi-state polls, however, were pretty rare until the exit polls began to be conducted at the state level as well as nationally. So there are a handful of clustered state polls, but we didn't see something like Crossley's all-state exits until, or election polls, until the exits started taking on state polling. And the first few years, it was California, New York. It was not a full gamut, but many more were added in 82, and in 92, all states were included. Since then, all states were included for several years, but then we moved to a situation where financially it is more limited. And so the election day polls tend to focus on those states that have big burning issues, major races, or are battleground states in the national election. We have a collection, however, of the state election day exit polls and the primary exit polls. And if you go to those, you will see the list of states, and in terms of the primaries, which races were polled. So we have a full list of that on the website, easy to access, makes a nice guide. So the state exits include the national module, but there are also questions specific to the state. Outside of the elections, we still have some of these long running poll series, right? So the Eagleton poll has been around for a very long time now, since the early 70s, and it continues today. And in fact, we have received the entire collection and are in the process of getting that full collection, which is a lot of polls, into the archive. Marquette Law School, these are the academic polls, and that is where a lot of state polling happens. But there are also media polls. Minnesota Star Tribune continues to have its major polling series. There are commercial organizations that focus on polling within a state, for instance, Mass Inc. Polling Group. And there are nonprofits, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts has done a number of large polls. They did a good bit of work during the ACA debate. And as I point out here, the Episcopal Health Foundation of Texas. There are also national pollsters who poll at the state level. Some of them do this primarily during elections. So you'll see a lot more state polls being conducted for obvious reasons, primarily in the battleground states during the year running up to the presidential elections or the midterms. But some of them do others as well. You will see issue-based polling at the state level, sometimes from Quinnipiac or Monmouth. This is one source of state data. But here's where we get into the sort of interesting question of why we're focusing on state data today at Roper, not to the exclusion of national data, certainly, but in addition to our ongoing focus on national data. state polling coverage has been a little bit scattershot over the years. A lot of projects are short-lived. They don't provide trend data because any questions that were being trended tend to disappear. The fielding is somewhat infrequent. So some of the very most established series only do a quarterly or even a yearly poll in their particular state. And certain states have a lot of pollsters. We joke frequently here at Roper as on the data team about the many times people in New Jersey must answer the phone because per capita they must have more state polling projects than anyone ever has, with Eagleton and the Rutgers State Health Policy and Center and the Stockton and Quinnipiac frequently going into. It's a lot of polling in New Jersey. On the other hand, someplace like Montana or Alaska might have virtually no polls. And so the coverage is very inconsistent. And we had some trouble back in 2016. So you may have heard a lot in the media about the failure of the polls in 2016. Well, the failure of the polls in 2016 is not primarily a failure of the national polls. The national polls are actually very good. However, the state polls, not so much. And there were some questions about that. Why did we not have good state polling? And largely it's that we, one, didn't have that much state polling comparatively. Two, they weren't close enough to the election. So a lot of the polls stopped much further back than you would want to. So the late deciders breaking to Trump seemed to be an issue. And some of the polls that we did have in a number of states, the only polls we had were polls that I will describe as providing limited information about their methodology. In other words, we don't know what they were doing. And if they aren't active members of the professional community, if they aren't sharing data or sharing at least methodological information sufficient to understand their process, it's really hard to know what's going on with those polls. So there were a lot of those polls at the state level and not as many polls from people who are willing to be transparent about methods. So what should the Roper Center do? IPOL, the American Association for Public Opinion Research, after making these conclusions in their postmortem on the 2016 election, encouraged more work to be done at the state level. And some pollsters really jumped into that. There are a number of national pollsters conducted state level polls in the last election that did not do so in 2016. The results of that are a little mixed. They didn't necessarily improve accuracy because there were some issues with accuracy in the last poll, the last election polling overall. But the Roper Center believed that we had an important role here, and we wanted to take some steps to help the polling community with a greater focus on state polling, to improve state polling and increase state polling. So one thing that we're doing is simply increasing efforts to collect state level data sets, as we have been doing. We've been collecting state data sets for, as I've mentioned, beginning decades. However, we've focused a bit more on it since coming to Cornell in 2016, 15. Sorry, pandemic brain. And we are putting yet more effort into that area. But the big thing, the thing that people are probably most excited about, is that we're adding question level entries to iPoll for state polls. So why are we doing this? One, we want to increase the visibility and findability of this data. If people don't know it's there, they can't be analyzing it, they can't be looking at it. We want it out there, we want people to look. Two, we want to preserve and make accessible the top lines. So we have this collection of paper top lines, a collection of digital top lines, as well as our data set collection. We also have permissions from current collectors of state data who are not yet providing data sets, but they are willing to give us their top line. So by putting those in iPoll, they are preserved. People can get to that information, and we can make it accessible to even the older material can become accessible to users in an easy to use way. And it's very important, the visibility, because visibility increases citation. And citation is academic currency. A lot of the major polling projects, as I mentioned, are at academic institutions, and they frequently need to prove that they are having an impact. And one way they do that is by noting the number of citations they get. By being at Roper, they can increase the number of citations. I do want to point out, just a note, that the National Network of State Polling did encourage state polling at the Odum Institute at University of North Carolina for a number of years. And there are nearly 600 polls there. There's some overlap with the Roper collection, but there are some things that are there that we do not have. So if you're looking for state polling, it is another major resource. But they do not seem to be adding anything new to that collection, have not done so for some time. So I want to talk about a really good article that you should all run out and read if you're interested in state polling. The State of the State Polls, Old Challenges and New Opportunities, 2008, a little out of date. But the old challenges remain, and the opportunities are the same ones. They did interviews with polling directors of 51 state polling projects. And this was practically all the state polling projects they found that were ongoing. And their statement on ongoing, their definition, has to be something they're doing more than a sporadic poll. And what I find most interesting about this, and I do find many things in this article are very interesting if you want to see some of the dynamics of how these things work and what it takes to run a state polling unit. But one of the things I found most interesting is that looking at that list of 51 state polling projects today, not that long later, 12 of them are still in existence. So those other projects have all closed, and many of them did not archive their data anywhere or even save or make available a collection of top-line reports. So many of these things were lost, and we need to put efforts into ensuring that they don't get lost in the future, that there aren't more things lost. And we are reaching out to any of the organizations where we're aware of a finished project. But it's often quite difficult to find the people who worked on it, and they sometimes don't have that data anymore. They just didn't save it. So the importance of preservation here is really key. But what they were looking at in this article, what their primary interest was collaboration. Who works together? How do they share questions? Do they do anything to allow comparisons in areas? Is there any way they can pool efforts? And I'm going to give you their recommendation. Improved archiving and regional polling partners. But Roper can't do anything about the second. It can certainly do something about the first. And thus we are. So new data currently being entered into iPoll at the question level includes national organizations that are doing state polling, which you can see this number there. Some of these long-term projects and some smaller academic projects. And we are open. So if you are part of a state polling organization, or you are aware of a state polling organization that we could approach, please let us know. We are trying to gather as much of this together as possible. Before I go over to iPoll, I do want to mention a couple things. One, there are other ways to look at state data than state level polls. It is not uncommon for researchers to group states in national polls by a particular policy, perhaps those states that have legalized marijuana for medical marijuana, for example, versus those states that have not. And then comparing attitudes within those groups of states is very doable with a national sample if you have a way to split the states into a roughly, 3 or maybe 4 equal groups. Some people will pool series to get enough people in a single state. Very large studies like ANES, which we have newly acquired and are processing along with Eagle. Everything's moving. Those can offer enough people to analyze. And there are some new possibilities with the online panels. The recently developed methods polls in our collection can offer very, very large samples. So it's at CCES or APOL. These are big surveys. You can break those out by state. All right, that's the end of that. Let's go to iPoll. Okay, that's, let me just share the screen again. See if I can do this right this time. Ah, there we go. Is it showing? Somebody give me a thumbs up. Anybody? No? It's all good? Okay. Yes, thank you, Ron. So when you come to iPoll, you hit the additional search filters expansion button, and you will see states, US only, a new edition. You can do ands and ors. So if you were looking for all New England states, you can throw them all in, that sort of thing, Boolean approach. I am going to go to, let's go to New Jersey, because New Jersey is just full of polling. I'm going to search iPoll. So you can see it's like any other iPoll result. You get your question, you get your top line, an image, the ability to cite the individual question, the study information, the citation for the study, and the downloads page. One thing I want to draw your attention to, however, is that when you are searching for a particular state, if we have national polls with an oversample in that state, those will show up. You will get the national questions. And this is one of those things that's wonderful if it's what you want at that moment, and annoying a little if you don't. So at some point we will be adding, there are plans to be adding a filter to allow you to toggle back and forth between the two options. However, by doing this, we do allow researchers who maybe want to be able to find the questions that are analyzable within a particular state to identify data sets where they're going to have that oversample. So currently we have approximately 10,000 questions in the database. More are going in every day, and they date back at this point. I think we've got some things back to 2015. So we are moving back in time. So the earliest will probably go in last. But we also have an additional 7,000 or so studies where you can search the national question and then navigate over to the downloads and download the data set and run analysis on an oversample in a particular state. And that is, it's of its own sort of value. It's just a slightly different approach. The top line is not immediately available there. So the normal filters apply, everything else applies. You simply have state data, which is really exciting and new for us, and we're really, really happy about it. Thinking about the historical collection, which is what I like to do best, I wanted to point out, oh gosh, it's going to be a different screen share, isn't it? Okay, let's see what happens if I jump over here. I want to show you just a couple of things that you might find in the files that move sort of beyond just the data set, because sometimes if you're working with a student who's not comfortable using statistical software, or you just want to get a top line result, or you're looking for more information about the poll, much of that can be found in some cases in the documentation. For example, did that work? Ron? Yes. Okay. So this is you still see iPoll. Oh, okay. All right, let me do it again. Stop share. Share screen. This should be easier. Okay, so here we have one of the items that's available. These are available for the last 2 decades or so worth of exit polls, where you can get the horizontals and the verticals. You can see both within a group what percentage of them voted for a particular candidate, and also what percentage of the candidates' votes came from a particular group. And those are ready and easy to grab right there in the document downloads page. The LA Times was a major, very, very important series, and we do have their decades worth of polling, and they're great polls. And if you notice, almost all of them include the marginals, the top lines, in the documentation, which is really nice if you want to just quickly download. That's a really big collection. And then I'm not quite sure why, but a number of our earliest polls, a number of the early state polls, included a lot of methodological and interesting information in the documentation. So the Minnesota poll usually has extensive interviewer instructions. They're really interesting, and they give a lot of detail about exactly how the poll was conducted. And they sometimes include open-ended, not always, but some of those are in there. So it's worth looking through the documentation. I know that, and I'm as guilty as anyone of pulling down a data set and going straight to the SPSS file and just, oh, the questions are there, it's enough. But looking at some of the documentation, there are these parts of the collection where there's a lot sitting in the documentation beyond just the questionnaire. And so I recommend that you take a look at those. So I've done my half hour of talking. I would love to do some answering of questions. Oh, Bob Ray's trying to teach me about technology. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. I don't remember it being, I think that, I don't know. I don't remember having this issue in the past, and yet today. So does anyone have any questions about the content of the state data collection, the future of the state data collection? If and see now, I'm going to do this thing. I'm gonna do exactly what Bob Ray suggests and do the general share screen, and then I'm going to go back to iPoll. And
folks, feel free to ask questions in the Q&A if you want to type, but I'm also going to unmute people's microphones here as well so that people can just talk. So give me a second and I'll get that done.
So are you seeing iPoll? I want to note that there are state level studies in the recently developed methods collection as well. So if you have not used that, there's not a lot in New Jersey yet, But there is this one, for example, a multi-country. And we will be adding questions on both sides.
Kathleen, did you see the two questions in the Q&A?
I'm reading them right now. How do you determine when a national poll has a state oversample? It is based on the sampling statement because virtually everything has a big enough California sample to take a look. Some of the, there's a lot of states that have a pretty high population, and if you're doing a regional or a decent, big-sized national poll, you'll get enough from those states to begin with. So you're really looking at a case where there was an intentional oversampling within a state because they wanted to do some comparative analysis. So for example, I mentioned those Blue Cross Blue Shield polls in Massachusetts. At least one of them was also fielded nationally. Same poll was fielded in Massachusetts at the same time. So it really is the same poll, but the sample is separate. It really is a separate Massachusetts sample, and you can analyze it. You have enough people to look into that. So that is that one. The Great Lakes poll. I have requested the Great Lakes poll, and I was not turned down, but I have not been given a yes yet. So I hope it will include the Great Lakes poll at some time in the near future, but it does currently does not. Other questions? What percentage of state poll questions are currently not? Oh, yeah, we have a lot to add. We estimate there could be as much as 100,000 questions. We're at about 10,000 questions. So yes, we have a lot to do. But we have been entering data into iPoll at unprecedented rates. Last year was our record breaker, just smashing earlier records for how much we were able to get into the question database. And I'm pretty certain that we will continue at that rate or near to that rate and substantially grow the state collection with each year. Some of the New York State polls going to go to, yes. Okay, if everyone's reading this question, the process for obtaining data from organizations conducting state polls is the same as it is for organizations conducting national polls, which is to say, we get in touch with the polling director, we develop a relationship, and then they send us data on a schedule that works for them. So in terms of data sets, sometimes those come in very rapidly, particularly during COVID-19. Some of our organizations have just been spectacular about being willing to send us data. The fastest I saw ever, there was a 48-hour turnaround from being published in iPoll from the actual field period ending, not when it was released, from the field period. So there are some things are going in incredibly quickly. But most organizations, I would say about 6 months is usually how long they like to hold on to a data set before they send it over, but it can range quite a bit. We have some people who don't send for 2 years and they send everything at once, the new and the old. It really depends on the data provider and the sort of bandwidth they have for getting things prepared for archiving. The top line collection is a permissions-based collection effort. So we go, basically we take those things and we enter them manually. That allows us to pull from a larger range of resources. And it allows it to go in very, very, very quickly. So we don't have to wait on a data set. But that means that we are requesting permission from an organization to include their questions. And when we get that permission, it then becomes part of our sort of daily search routine. We know where those things are going to be, and our iPoll manager goes in and pulls them down. We have been prioritizing, because of the highest interest in national data, we do prioritize getting new polls from national polls into iPoll faster than state polling. So whereas we try to, for a standard media poll, have just a couple days turnaround at most, for a state poll, it might be a week or two. It shouldn't be, really, 2 is a little long, more like a week, maybe a week and a half. We are trying to get those in. There are also polls that are being conducted at the state level that are not on populations that we normally include in iPoll. So we will include subpopulations. We certainly have many likely voter polls, or polls of women, of Black Americans, of Catholics. There's all sorts of subpopulations, but we generally don't include things like Sienna's series of business leaders in New York State, which is a very interesting series, and we do have the data sets. We don't have the questions in, but we will be filling in. And there are, when you say there are gaps, there are certainly gaps, but that's partly because we're trying to start to backfill all of the material, and 100,000 questions at least. So we will have a lot. Can iPoll users initiate requests for specific polls via ROPR? Oh, please do. Please do, because when I call that polling director and say, can I have permission to do this? Or would you be willing to share your data sets? Knowing that somebody is specifically interested in finding their data this way is a great incentive. They're glad to hear it. So if you have a poll that you would like to see, please let me know, and I will see what I can do about getting that in. I think I answered all the questions in there. Yes, Ron, and they gave us permission a couple weeks ago, and we're starting to get those in, all of them going back. So there's a lot. They've done a lot. They've been around since the 90s. The Public Policy Institute of California has been conducting excellent work since the 90s. So we have just downloading them took quite a while, actually. There's a lot of top lines there, but yes, they gave us question level permissions, so we'll be adding those. Other questions?
And like I said, I've made you all available for or able to speak if you want. Unmute and go ahead and talk. Don't feel the need to type.
Okay, I will. I'll get in touch with our good friends at Sienna and see what we are missing. Frankly, a lot of organizations who were pretty consistent about sending data were less so during the pandemic, which, I certainly understand. Everybody's a little shorthanded. Anything? We are also prioritizing getting the exits into the question level. So I'm trying to push those to at least the historical exits being the first thing we do when we go back in time, because there's such a high level of interest in that. I think they might be out, Henry.
It's looking that way. Well, we will give you back a little some minutes back to your day then, if there are no further questions. I said, will the slides be available, Kathleen?
Sure, they certainly can be.
And we'll also make a recording of this available as well. And I'll send that out to everybody who's attended. All right.
And I'm always available for questions. Feel free to contact me directly if you have a particular thing you're looking
Very good. Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate your time. And something does occur to you, like Kathleen said, feel free to shoot her questions at dataservices@theworkercenter.org, and glad to help in any way we can. Thanks for your time. Thank you, Kathleen, for putting this on. And have a great rest of your summer, everyone. Take care. Thanks.
for. Thank you.